Emergency ambulance. What's the address of the emergency?
Cook Street. There's a young boy. Looks like he's collapsed outside. I don't know.
Outside of which number?
4758.
Sorry?
4758, I think.
47 Cook Street.
Yeah.
What area?
Barking.
Okay.
It looks like he's collapsed or had a seizure or something. Always just drunk. But, yeah.
What's the telephone number you're calling from?
I'm just pulled up in the car. I've got to get my car on the parking.
That's right, don't worry about that. What's the telephone number you're calling from?
In the early hours of June 19, 2014, in a quiet residential area of Cook Street, Barking, East London, a security camera captured the moment a tall, blond man hurried out of his apartment. He paused at the front door, looked back, and pulled out his... A few minutes later, at 4:18 a.m., a call was made to the 999 emergency service. The caller identified himself as Stephen Port, and his voice was even but tinged with concern. "I've just come out of my house and there's a man lying unconscious in front of my door," he said. "He doesn't seem to be breathing. I don't know what happened." Police and paramedics quickly arrived at the scene. In front of the apartment building, they found a young man lying on his back on the pavement, unresponsive, without a pulse. There were no obvious injuries, no signs of a struggle. The victim was identified as Anthony Walgate, 23, a fashion design student from Hull. The first person to stumble upon the body, Stephen Port, had no idea that he knew the victim. But in the pre-dawn darkness of that quiet neighborhood, no one suspected that he was the first link in a string of brutal serial killers targeting young men and using a dating app as a deadly trap. Stephen Port, born in 1975, lived alone in a ground-floor flat in Barking, East London. He worked part-time as a chef at a local school, had no criminal record, and was described by neighbors as a quiet, reserved man. But behind that normal exterior was an active online life. Port spent much of his time on male dating apps, particularly Grindr, where he sought out young men. Port's victim list included 4 young people, none of whom he knew in real life, and all of whom were lured through Grindr, the only connection between the killer and his victims. Anthony Walgate, 23, was a fashion design student at Middlesex University from Hull. He arrived in London in June 2014 for a short-term fashion show job, but was later found dead after being lost contact. Gabriel Kovari, 22, Slovakian, passionate about art and photography. He lives in London, moving between friends' houses due to lack of permanent accommodation. Kovari is considered polite and friendly. Daniel Whitworth, 21, was Gabriel's ex-boyfriend. He lived in Kent, worked part-time, and was a quiet man. He wanted to settle down, but also went missing just weeks after Gabriel's death. Jack Taylor, 25, was a night shift security guard who lived with his family near Barking. He had little social life and was close to his parents and 2 sisters. Jack was the last person to be murdered, and his death forced a reinvestigation. None of them had any direct connection to each other, yet they were all targets of Stephen Port, a man who knew how to hide behind a phone and an innocent face, gradually approaching, poisoning, and murdering young men looking for affection and connection. Before the case was exposed, Stephen Port lived a seemingly normal life. He worked as a part-time chef, had few friends, and mostly kept to himself. However, behind the quiet exterior was a deviant and dangerous lifestyle. Port had used GHB, a powerful water-soluble anesthetic commonly used in sexual assaults. He had a controlling streak and sought out young men through dating apps, particularly Grindr. There he would approach them by being friendly, sweet, and even promising love or financial support. After gaining their trust, Port would invite them to his apartment, where he would secretly spike their drinks with the drug and render them unconscious. The young men, most of them just starting out in life, were caught off guard. They believed they were meeting someone nice, but with Port, each encounter was a calculated plan. After the victims were unconscious, he would exploit them and leave them to die. It all happened in silence, in the darkness of a small apartment, where Port continued to live as if nothing had happened. No one knew that the deaths, seemingly accidents or drug overdoses, were in fact premeditated murders. In June 2014, Stephen Port began approaching Anthony Walgate through the dating app Grindr. He introduced himself as a film producer and offered to pay Anthony if he agreed to act as his lover in a short video. Anthony agreed and went to Port's flat in Barking. There, Port spiked his drink with GHB, rendering him unconscious. Anthony died a few hours later from an overdose of GHB. Instead of calling an ambulance, Port left the body outside the flat and called 999, lying that he had discovered it by accident. This was the first death and the beginning of a series of tragedies that lasted more than a year. Just 2 months later, in August 2014, Gabriel Kovari, a young Slovakian, went missing after telling friends he had moved in with a nice man in Barking. His body was found near St. Margaret's churchyard, not far from Port's home. There were no obvious signs of violence, and the cause of death was listed as a GHB overdose. Less than 3 weeks later, Gabriel's ex-boyfriend Daniel Whitworth was found dead in the same location. Beside his body was a note believed to be a suicide note, in which Daniel confessed to accidentally killing Gabriel and committing suicide out of guilt. However, later investigations revealed that the note was computer-generated, printed, and completely forged. Stephen Port had created it to throw the police off guard. The case came to a head in September 2015, when Jack Taylor, a 25-year-old security guard, disappeared after leaving his home in the early morning. His body was found in the same churchyard park where Gabriel and Daniel had been left. Once again, a post-mortem examination showed that he had died from GHB overdose, with extremely high levels in his blood. All 4 victims had a common denominator. They were young, gay, healthy, and had met Port through Grindr. All died shortly after their encounter. During this time, Port continued to function normally, posting on social media and interacting with others as if nothing had happened. But the clues, from the poison, to the location of the bodies, to the forged suicide notes, began to add up to a string of coincidences that couldn't be ignored. The atmosphere around the deaths became heavy, like a bomb waiting to explode. Between June 2014 and September 2015, 4 young men were found dead around Churchyard Park in Barking. Although the victims had clear similarities, they were all young men, met on a dating app and died from GHB. Police treated each case separately, without tracing the common thread. Initial conclusions were inclined towards the hypothesis of drug overdose or suicide, especially in the case of Daniel Whitworth. The victim is said to have left a suicide note. Meanwhile, relatives of the victims, especially Jack Taylor's family, repeatedly sent requests for a reinvestigation because of suspicions of staging, but were not taken seriously. It wasn't until late 2015, when the Taylor family took the initiative to search for security camera footage, that a video emerged showing Jack with Stephen Port the night before his death. This was the first direct evidence linking a single suspect to the crime scene, forcing police to re-examine the entire string of deaths. The reinvestigation revealed a series of suspicious coincidences. All 4 bodies were found within a radius of Port's home, in similar positions and without signs of struggle. Forensic results confirmed that all 4 victims died from unusually high doses of GHB poisoning, a drug Port often used during dates. In the first 3 cases, the crime scene was not properly secured. There was no cross-examination or thorough forensic examination. The body was disposed of quickly, potential evidence was ignored, and the perpetrator was not questioned in depth. Only after the video showed Jack Taylor with Port did authorities search Port's apartment, where they found GHB, syringes, a laptop containing videos and photos of the attacks, and contact records for the victims. This evidence not only confirmed the poisoning, but also revealed a systematic murder plan that had gone undetected for more than a year. After Jack Taylor's unnatural death, it seemed that the case would continue to be closed like the previous cases. However, unlike the other families, Jack's relatives refused to stay silent. They proactively collected evidence, recorded unusual details, and took them straight to the investigating agency. This persistence led the police to re-examine the series of deaths with similar characteristics that occurred around Barking. During the investigation, an unidentified DNA sample that had been stored in the forensic file of victim Daniel Whitworth was compared to the new database, a match for Stephen Port. Additionally, logs from a seized computer device showed that Port had searched for information about GHB, how to conceal a body, and followed news articles about deaths. At the same time, tracing data from dating apps and the victims' phones confirmed that Port was the last person to have come into contact with each victim in the hours before their deaths. The investigation began to shift from a personal accident theory to an organized murder, with clear elements of preparation and cover-up. On 15 October 2015, after completing legal procedures, police arrested Stephen Port at his residence, a ground-floor apartment rented through social housing in Cook Street. Port did not resist, appeared to cooperate, but was immediately separated from his means of communication and personal devices. During the search, police seized a large amount of evidence that had not appeared in any previous investigation files, from chemicals hidden in the back of a closet to a list of Grindr users who had chatted with Port for over a year. Most importantly, a hard drive contained a homemade video of the victim unconscious, indicating not only murder, but also intentional sexual abuse before her death. Port was taken to a London jail, and from that point on the case was reclassified as serial murder with a serious sexual element, drawing in the Metropolitan Police, the Special Crime Unit, and the department's independent misconduct watchdog. It was the first time the entire old system had been overhauled for missing a murder spree spanning nearly 500 days. After his arrest, Stephen Port was questioned several times while in custody. Initially, he denied any involvement with the victims, claiming he was just a passerby or only talked online, never met in person. However, investigators found clear inconsistencies in his statements, especially when compared with phone records, text messages, and surveillance video.
So did you have any involvement in the death of the male that we just spoke about a short while ago, Gabriel Cavari or Gabriel Klein?
No, I didn't.
So, were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone. That's done at the party by someone else. The name I recognised, one of the boys you mentioned before, was he's normally at the parties and deals with administrating drugs.
Who's that, sorry?
Daniel.
When confronted with overwhelming evidence, including DNA, CCTV footage, and chat logs, Port admitted to meeting the victims, but continued to downplay his role. He claimed he didn't know they were using drugs, or that the deaths occurred in their sleep, without any intention to kill. But the pattern of the 4 incidents suggested a pattern of deliberate actions, not accidents.
All found dead. Stephen?
Yeah, I understand, but...
Close to your house. One of them had been in your house, either just before or at the time when he died, and was found to have large quantities of a drug in his system. The other 3 were all found just over the road in the churchyard, or just beside the churchyard in that area that we've discussed,
Yeah.
propped up against a wall, short distance from your house, all again with high levels of GHB in them, enough to kill them. Highly unusual way to die for one person. This is 4 all found very close to where you live. All men, young men, type of men that you say that you find attractive. All now dead, Stephen.
As it happened, Anthony, I know nothing about the other 3, how they come to be.
Stephen, this is serious.
Yes, I know.
Okay. It's really important that you tell us the absolute truth.
Yeah. I've told you so far is true.
Prosecutors worked with police and technical experts to build a comprehensive dossier that clearly reflected the systematic criminal process. Documents collected included a forensic examination confirmed GHB as the cause of death, with traces of port appearing on the body and the victim's belongings. Electronic devices contained hundreds of messages of sexual harassment, videos of sexual assaults, and suspicious search histories related to drugs, rapes, and hiding bodies. Security cameras in the barking area showed the last victims with port before they disappeared. Witness testimony, including neighbors, friends of the victims, and contacts who had seen port online. In particular, the forgery of Daniel Whitworth's suicide note was seen as a key piece of evidence. Textual analysis, print traces, and writing style demonstrated that Port had staged the crime scene to mislead investigators, behavior that clearly indicated an intention to conceal the crime from the start. In October 2016, Stephen Port appeared in court at the Old Bailey, London. Throughout the trial, which lasted nearly a month, Port showed little emotion, at times sitting silently, avoiding eye contact, or appearing indifferent to the testimony of witnesses and the victim's family. The defense argued that Port may have a personality disorder, which leads to his actions without realizing the consequences. However, the jury did not accept this reasoning. The evidence showed that he was calculating, reoffending repeatedly, and engaged in deliberate cover-ups. The trial concluded with a clear conclusion. This was a series of systematic, sexually motivated murders carried out over a long period of time with a high degree of danger. Port was identified as the sole perpetrator in all 4 GHB-related deaths in Barking. After just a few days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Stephen Port was found guilty on all 22 counts, including 4 counts of murder, 7 counts of sexual assault, 4 counts of attempted poisoning, and numerous counts of using a false identity to gain access to his victims. Throughout the trial, Port did not protest, did not ask for leniency, and remained almost completely silent, even when confronted by the victims' relatives. Stephen Port was sentenced to life in prison without parole, one of the harshest sentences in the British justice system, ensuring he will never be released. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police came under fire for failing to investigate, ignoring clear evidence, and ignoring warnings from the victim's family. An independent inquiry later determined that at least 3 lives could have been saved if the police had acted correctly in the first place.
We completely accept that people's trust in us has been damaged by a number of recent events. What has happened in connection with the deaths of these 4 young men is part of that damage.
Gay lives are being taken for granted, the victims' families said. The 4 men, Anthony, Gabriel, Daniel, and Jack, were young people with hope and a future, but they were victims of a cold-blooded killer. Stephen Port used technology, mistrust, and deadly loopholes in the police and legal systems. Over 15 months, he killed, faked the crime scene, and then went about his life as normal, as if nothing had happened. But even more terrifying than Port's crimes is the indifference of those responsible for protecting justice. Through indifference, delay, and prejudice, the system has created conditions for him to continue killing. They should have been alive. The words of a victim's relative are not only regretful, but also a warning to the whole society. No one should die because of silence, because of gender, or because of being forgotten in a system that was created to protect them.